We're more likely to be attacked by terrorists than by a nuclear bomb, and there's no threat at all, really, of invasion by another country. The hierarchy of risks facing us as a nation has good news and bad news, and it's been made public today. Tomorrow we shall learn how the government plans to reorganise our military to face the threats. Tonight we just have a rough idea of what the risks are. Our defence editor, Mark Urban, reports.
Today was the moment for the government to chart a course, to provide a blueprint, a strategy, something they'd always accused Labour of lacking. But nobody underestimated the difficulty of doing this while fighting a war in Afghanistan and trying to trim the budget deficit with heavy cuts.
There's no science to this. In 5 years' time, we'll be talking about a different threat. It's very hard to quantify these things. And with the modern nature of the terrorist threat, where someone can be radicalised at home using his own laptop and also develop capabilities, or at least be told how to create a bomb, it's more difficult than ever to kind of create a kind of trajectory, or at least to anticipate a trajectory as to where the next threat is coming from.
A behemoth like HMS Belfast reminds us of the pace that alliances and technology change. Launched in 1938, it was used against the Germans and then in the Cold War. Now Russian companies have paid for new masts. If today's paper was an innovation, that's partly because previous governments have learned the risks of trying to predict future threats.
Of course, trying to assess the likelihood of a particular threat to national security is quite different from coming to an estimate about how much damage might be done to the country if a much less likely threat were to materialise. The most obvious illustration of this is that a nuclear-armed dictator heading another country is extremely unlikely to threaten Britain's security for the foreseeable future, but if he did, the consequences of having no response available could be catastrophic. Some would argue that in giving themselves such a complex equation of the likelihood of threats, the severity of their possible impact, and what might be done to guard against them, the National Security Council have set themselves a mission impossible.
Today the government graded threats to the UK. Tier 1, the gravest, included terrorism, cyber attack, a major natural disaster, or a foreign war drawing in this country. Tier 2 included a WMD attack on the UK by a foreign state or proxy, a major rise in organised crime, or severe disruption to UK satellite networks. Tier 3 involved a conventional attack on this country or a NATO ally, disruption of fuel and gas supplies, or a Chernobyl-type nuclear accident. The paper said resources and priorities would now be ordered according to this ranking.
Well, we're updating the threats, and no one could have anticipated 20 or 30 years ago that cyber warfare would be something that we have to take account of. So we do have to bring our national security up to date. And the Prime Minister will be announcing tomorrow our Defence and Security Review that says, what does that mean in terms of military hardware? What equipment do we need? Because that's clearly very different from when we were trying to face the Warsaw Pact in the Cold War with large numbers of tanks in Germany.
For many, the biggest news in the paper is its emphasis on cyber warfare. GCHQ says that more than 1,000 emails each month deliberately target government networks. Criminals and foreign governments are penetrating British businesses too, remotely by computer. As a result of being graded a Tier 1 threat, an additional £500 million is on its way to boost cyber defences.
We have seen in recent years a huge increase in cyber attack and cyber crime. Cyber attack in the Georgia emergency and also in the Baltic states. Cyber crime in the Beijing Olympics, huge increase in cyber crime. So given the very nature of modern military systems, commercial systems, systems of the state which rely heavily on computing and communications via computers, then cyber is a very important area.
The Cabinet Office explained its methodology with this graph. Moving left to right showed events of increasing likelihood. The vertical scale measured impact. How did the ranking of Tier 1, 2 and 3 threats fit in? Officials declined to be specific, saying judgments had been made. Inevitably, some believe that the need to cut government spending has conditioned many of those judgments.
No question that there's a treasure influence here in terms of the next 4 or 5 years. But the argument, I guess, would be that 4 or 5 years down the line, were a new threat to emerge, which we haven't anticipated, the economic situation of the country will be such as that we can respond more effectively to it.
Of course, it helps in shooting down somebody else's national security arguments if what they're proposing is extremely expensive. So a seaborne invasion of the British Isles or a missile attack on this country is not only very unlikely, but it's incredibly expensive to guard against. The only problem is that if you cut the forces designed to defend against that very unlikely threat, and the danger then materialises at some future point, you're sunk.
Today's paper begs many questions, like whether aircraft carriers really counter any of today's Tier 1 threats, or why so much should go to Trident when it's designed to deter a Tier 2 danger. But at least the government has made its estimate.
Well, with us now is Andrew Mitchell, who sits on the National Security Council.